Good day to you. Welcome back to Brit Lit Session 16. I'm Thelma English, and I'm glad to see you again this week. Let's open with a word of prayer and then do our devotion. We'll have our volunteer read from Imitation of Christ. Heavenly Father, we are thankful for this day. I pray that you would bless each of these students who has chosen to use their time so wisely today to study British literature from a Christian perspective, remembering Christian works and remembering Christian authors and their importance in our Western world. We thank you for the privilege of home education and the privilege of having YouTube videos available for our lectures. Lord, bless each of these. In Jesus' name, amen. Again, if you are watching the series as a class, you will need to contact me to get teacher materials. Thelma's library has lots of materials. The passwords are there so that the passwords are written there so that you can get into the American Lit, British Lit, Classical Lit, New Testament survey, and Old Testament survey. I have taught all of these classes. Some of them are available on YouTube as videos like this one, and others are available as audios with PowerPoints. And you are welcome to take those PowerPoints, take those Bible PowerPoints and make them into your own and teach a class. Let me know what you're doing so that I can feel good about continuing to pay to have the website up on the web, up on the internet. Most of you know that I struggle with my voice. I have all types of issues with my voice and my sinuses and my throat, some damage from chemo, from cancer, and some just the damage of lots and lots of years of asthma and allergies. So I appreciate you listening to my voice, be it what it is. All right, let's pause for our volunteer to read from Imitation of Christ. Okay, let's continue to get going. I never get enough of Imitation of Christ. I hope that you are using it as a devotional at home. If you are listening alone without a group, I hope that you are reading one every week. Read it out loud to yourself during that pause. Session 16. This is the week that seniors need to have selected a senior project. By next week, they need to announce that. So talk with your parent or a teacher or friends or pastor or somebody this week about what you are going to check, what you're going to choose for your senior project. The idea is that the last week or two before class ends, you will give a 5 to 7 minute presentation to the class and teach them something about something that has to do with British literature, something we don't know. You could do a biography of John Donne. You could do a biography of John Milton. You could do a biography of some author that you really enjoy. You could do a biography of J.R. Tolkien. You could do a biography of someone that we're doing later this year. Look through your schedule and look at the authors. G.K. Chesterton, do a biography of him, or C.S. Lewis, or George MacDonald. These are fantastic writers, and the class would really enjoy to hear more personal information about one of these authors, their home life, their family life, what their literature meant to them, who were their advisors, let's see. Oh, you could write about so many different things. I've had students for senior projects make games. And so, for example, English literature Jeopardy, where you take things that you're supposed to know by now and write questions and answer for them and give them point values and play it Jeopardy style. That makes a wonderful last class or a additional class. Sometimes my classes are small and rather personal, and they choose to have a end of year party at somebody's house. And you can play a Jeopardy game for part of that. Or no games and just party and enjoy what you have read. So next week, you're taking home your open book exam this week, and it is due Oh, your open book exam is due today, excuse me. And I know we don't talk much about exams because I do expect that parents and teachers may change the exams up a little bit to make it fit your class or you as a person. Or if you're doing this at home and your parent is in charge, your parent may use the exam to verbally exam you and then score you on that. So teachers and facilitators and parents are doing exams differently to make it suit their class. If you are doing it as a structured group in a classroom, then I expect you had to take home that open book exam. It was all really forced review, things that you've heard about in class and you had to review. If there is anything really exceptional that the teacher sees this week in grading exams, I would expect next week that they will simply take a little bit of extra time, maybe after the devotion, take a little bit of extra time and use that time for reading from exams that had amazing answers, some of the essay type answers. We're reading another 50 pages in Milton. I think most of you went ahead and bought the advised Norton Critical Edition. And so when I read from some of these essays, I may give page numbers, but it's possible that the Norton Critical Editions have changed. My edition, I don't know what year mine is, but yours may have changed since it was published, so our page numbers may not match exactly. If you have a different edition, we're reading from book 4, line 501 through book 6, line 500. And the Milton quizzing next week will be designed to cover that. We are reading L'Allegro. I have to remember how to pronounce that. Milton's poems and Il Penseroso on syllabus pages 260 to 264, these poems. They have quite a few classical allusions, and I know it's not graceful when I stop every line and explain what the classical allusion is, but until you've done classical lit, maybe even then you might not catch all of the classical allusions. You have to remember that we're going back in time 400 years to a time when people were extremely well educated. Milton knew multiple languages. Milton was an incredibly intelligent person. So for him to write a poem, we cannot expect to understand it the first time that we read it. A poem is meant to be read and read and read and look up all of the little things. And so I will give you some things in brackets and explain other things, but you simply have to pay attention and read it again. Your Paradise Lost paper is due session 21. This is a long project. You have until session 21, but you should be thinking about what you're going to write your paper about. This is normally the end of the second quarter, 8 weeks being for every quarter, unless you have a different plan in place because you took a longer or shorter Christmas break, or depending on when your state is having spring break this year. I try to stick with the spring break that my students would have had they been in a public school, because many students have relatives who are in college, older siblings who are in college, and it's important for them to have the same spring break so that the family has the same week of vacation. So each year when I make my schedule and add all of the dates, I check in online and find out what the local schools are doing about spring break and then do the same thing. So I always work with the families. I am family first, home education next, but families need to be together. In fact, if students want to go on a family vacation and they're used to going the week after school starts or in October when the weather is still nice at Disney, and miss a week of school, I'm all for that. I'm behind them. I make all types of allowances so that they can do that. So your facilitator, teacher, or parent needs to remember that too. We're homeschool all the way. So senior projects have to have something to do with British literature. An author, you could even do a place. You could talk about the interregnum, that 11 years where Britain did not have a monarch. Cromwell was in charge. You could do a little bio of Cromwell, Oliver Cromwell, or you could talk about the interregnum, that 11-year process, what happened. You can choose a book, you could choose Paradise Lost and talk about the political undertones of Paradise Lost. We tend to think it's all about Genesis with Adam and Eve and the fall, but it also is talking about the British losing paradise. They had 11 years of paradise during this interregnum with no monarch, and they had every opportunity, every chance to do what we did here in America, but they went back to tradition and took a king again. You could talk about that interregnum and the potential and the possibilities and how they were stuck in the mire of 1600 years worth of kings. Whereas here in America, we were the great experiment. And so you could do some type of a contrast presentation, how America was begun and how Britons couldn't get past the monarch. Or you could talk about the British monarchy today. That wouldn't be too far fetched, as long as it is not like uh, a tabloid newspaper type thing. But you could talk about the monarchy today and how it works or doesn't work, and how it is just for show and basically for tourism, to encourage tourism, because all of the things about kings and queens and princesses and princes are very interesting to Americans, because we don't do that. We don't have princesses in America. And once you've been a president, your kids are not princes and princesses. And we shake their hands and we don't bow before people. That's very foreign in America. And we have some British lit things that are coming up. We already saw that in Shakespeare, where some people are a higher class than another. And we don't have that in America. We don't have classes of people. So we'll be talking about that as British literature continues. But you could address any of those things in a presentation. Just get approval from your parent, teacher, or facilitator first. And those are presented the last 2 days of class, which actually would be 31 and 32, I think, rather than 30 and 31, as I show on the screen. Things that your teacher will look for, that I looked for when evaluating a senior presentation: introduce your topic. Don't just start talking about something. Tell us what you're going to talk about. Make eye contact with your listeners, but you don't have to memorize your information, especially if you are using PowerPoint. You can put the main points and then you can say all of the in-between points. Use lots of slides. I always suggest no more than, well, take a look at my slides and put about that same amount of information. I think every slide deserves a picture or a map or something like that about your topic. And I expect you to not be too fast or too slow. Don't be so slow people are waiting for you to talk, and don't be so fast that they're missing everything you say because you're nervous. Confidence. I expect you to show confidence that you're familiar with it. I do expect most of you, unless you're doing a game or something, will utilize PowerPoint, unless you're just giving a mini biography or something. But even then, there are plenty of pictures available for all of the authors and their homes and the places and the maps that show where they lived and where they're located. So that's the value of PowerPoint. And you should know how to use PowerPoint before you get to college anyway. The clarity of your information. Can we understand your subject better when we're finished, or do we wonder what you just said? And the number of resources utilized. Please use a variety of resources. Be very careful about the internet. If you're looking up John Milton, be sure you go to a site that is either dedicated to British literature or dedicated to John Milton, so that we know you're getting pretty good information. I realize some of you don't even have access to books and libraries and things like that right now and are depending on the internet. You're probably going to depend on the internet for pictures, things like that, unless you take your camera phone with you to the library and you carefully take photos from books, and then those can be made into PowerPoint slides. I do that all the time. Take photos from books. You can do that. If you are using the new Chat GPT AI, you do need to be aware that although it has lots of information, my experience has been that it has a lot of incorrect information too. We have looked up things here at home. How many children does somebody famous have? Somebody who passes away, and we look up information on them and it's incorrect. Or I'll look up and it gets really politically correct. Or near the end, they kind of say, we're sorry if everything above is wrong. So you have to be really careful using Chat GPT AI software. I'm sure it will improve as time goes on, but don't be sure to use that. You can use that as a source to get some main points or something important. What's the most important thing John Milton wrote? What is the most important thing John Donne did? What was he best known for? What was his life like? What were the names of his wives? You can get information like that on ChatGPT, but you're going to have to cross-reference it with somewhere else to make sure that it's true, so that you don't get too many wives or too many kids or incorrect locations, all types of things. When I've been doing research on ChatGPT, just over the last month, was just came out November 30th, and this is just January 2023. So do check your sources. Make sure that your sources are good sources. Now, we continued reading John Milton's Paradise Lost. We read this week from book 2, line 601 to book 4, line 500, and that's what the quizzing will be on. Now, let's take a look at Lycidas. This is in your syllabus, your 430 or 440 giant PDF copy syllabus, which is also available at Thelma's library. Download that giant PDF file and either read it from your iPad, or I suggest printing it. I take mine to the printers and have it printed front and back, and then it's about 220 pages of pieces of paper, and you can get it into a notebook, and that way you have it with you every week. I have had students who've taken their Brit Lit syllabus, many students who take the American Lit and Brit Lit syllabus and take them right into college with them, and classical lit if they're going to do classical lit, because there's so much information there that you can't really find online, especially old books. You can't find all the old books online. Sometimes you can, but we tend to think everything is available on the internet, and that's not actually true yet. Not true yet. So this is an elegy. It's a funeral, memorial type thing, memorial service, and he's speaking this elegy that Milton wrote because of the death of his good friend Edward King, who had drowned. So it's a very sad death that he drowned. The poems we are reading were written before Milton wrote Paradise Lost. So an elegy is just a mournful song or a poem for somebody who's passed. And if you're on page 259, then you're in the right place. Let's see, 258. 258. And we read, in this monody, the author bewails a learned friend unfortunately drowned in his passage from Chester on the Irish seas in 1637, and by occasion foretells the ruin of our corrupted clergy then in their height. Okay, so in your syllabus, you have a photocopy page from an old book from 1944, and this is something you're going to have a reading online, and foretells the ruin of our corrupted clergy. So this is after the Reformation, but John Milton sees corruption in the clergy, and he's very upset about it. And he has quite a few pieces of information here about Lycidas and comparing the good clergy and corrupted clergy who were then in their height at this time in 1637. And so we'll go through this a little bit slowly, especially to explain some classical metaphors. Once you take classical lit, you will understand a lot of these metaphors, but even then, even in classical lit, which is always a 1.5 credit class for my students, really should be a 2 credit class. If you're at a private school or something, or even at home, it probably should be classical literature 1 credit and classical history 1 credit. You wouldn't have to add much more reading, and it would fulfill 2 credits easily. When you look at what you can earn a credit in history in a high school, in a public high school, classical lit, you learn lots more than what you could at your high school. All right, the poem, Lycidas. Yet once more, O ye laurels, and even the word laurels. A laurel wreath is what a Olympic winner would wear. They would make a laurel crown, a crown out of laurels, a wreath that would fit on top of the winner's head, and you won that. You didn't win a gold medal and that. And so your laurels, that's why if they say, we'll give him his due laurels, it means recognition that he did something really important, just like a laurel wreath for winning an event at the Olympics. Yet once more, O ye laurels, and once more, ye myrtles brown, with ivy never sere. I come, and of course the spelling is old time spelling. I come to pluck your berries, harsh and crude, and with forced fingers rude, shatter your leaves before the mellowing year. Bitter constraint and sad occasion dear compels me to disturb your season due, for Lycidas is dead, dead ere his prime, young Lycidas, and hath not left his peer. There's no one like him left. Who would not sing for Lycidas? Amazing, really. He knew himself to sing and build the lofty rhyme. He must not float upon his watery bier, unwept and welter to the parching wind, without the mead of some melodious tear. Mead would be something you would brew and drink, so without the nourishment of some melodious tear. And his body was lost at sea. The boat went down. Begin then, sisters of the sacred well, and that would be the Muses in Homer's day with the Iliad and the Odyssey, and then even with the Aeneid later on, you would invoke the Muse first. You were there, tell me how it happened, because they're goddesses. So the Muses, tell me how it happened, you were there. And the idea is that they give support that what he said happened is really what happened. Begin then, sisters of the sacred well, that from beneath the seat of Jove, the head god, Jove doth spring, begin and somewhat loudly sweep the string, hence with denial vain and coy excuse, so may some gentle muse with lucky words favor my destined urn. So he's going to give this beautiful speech that the muses will help him with, and he hopes that when he does this for his good friend, that someday someone will do that also for him. And as he passes turn, and bid fair peace be to my sable shroud, for we were nursed upon the same same hill, which means they attended college together at Cambridge. They were nursed, they were brought up, they were taught at the same place, fed the same flock by fountain, shade, and rill. Together both ere the high lawns appeared, under the opening eyelids of the morn, we drove afield and both together heard what time the gray fly wins her sultry horn, battening our flocks with the fresh dews of night, oft till the star that rose at evening bright. So until Venus rose. Beautiful use of the rising star. Toward heaven's descent had sloped his westering wheel. Meanwhile, the rural ditties were not mute, attempered to the oaten flute. Rough satyrs danced and fauns with cloven heel from the glad sound would not be absent long. And old Demodus loved to hear our song. So he's talking about some old guy used to love hearing them sing and dance and acting silly. And Demodus is the name of a clownish shepherd in Arcadia, a poem by Sidney, very important in its own right. But here, maybe calling him Demodus means our old tutor loved to hear our song. But oh, the heavy change, now thou art gone. Now thou art gone and never must return. Thee, shepherd, thee the woods and desert caves, with wild thyme and the gadding vine overgrown. So now with Edward's death, with Edward gone, Lycidas, I'm just going through here and forgetting his full name. That's what happens when you get old. But with his death, school is not the same. They even, the vines are overgrown. Nobody's having any fun right now, is the idea. And all their echoes mourn. The willows and the hazel copses green shall now no more be seen, fanning their joyous leaves to thy soft lays, as killing as the canker to the rose, or taintworm to the weaning herds that graze, or frost to flowers that their gay wardrobe wear, when first the white thorn blows, such Lycidas thy lost a shepherd's ear. So with him gone, nobody's having any fun. Nobody's singing soft lays. It's like when the canker worm ruins the rose. It's like another worm gets in the herds and, the cows get sick. It's like frost to flowers that ruins the flowers. And so that's what his loss is like. Where were ye nymphs? So this would be the nymphs of the sea who could have rescued him in classical mythology. Where were ye nymphs when the remorseless deep closed over the head of your loved Lycidas? For neither were ye playing on the steep where your old bards, poets, the famous druids lie, nor on the shaggy top of Mona high, nor yet where Diva spreads her wizard stream. I fondly dream. Had ye been there, for what could that have done? What could the muse herself that Orpheus bore? Another classical allusion. The muse herself for her enchanting son, whom universal nature did lament. When by the rout that made the hideous roar, his gory visage down the stream was sent, down the swift Hebrus to the Lesbian shore. And this is the island of Lesbos. You'll learn this in classical mythology. That Lesbos was a poet, and she was thought to be, she preferred women, and that's where our word lesbian comes from. Amazing, huh? It's also the island where Calliope was born. She is the muse of poetry, so the lesbian shore is symbolic of poetry. Down the swift Hebrus to the lesbian shore. And no one thought that word was horrible back 400 years ago. Alas, what boots it with incessant care to tend the homely slighted shepherd's trade and strictly meditate the thankless muse, were it not better done as others use, to sport with Amaryllis in the shade, or with the tangles of Nerea's hair? Fame is the spur that the clear spirit doth raise. So he's talking about an amaryllis, which is the name of a shade. It's also a flower. And the Nerea's hair, that's a character from Virgil. I'm not sure if that's from the Aeneid or not, or Virgil's poetry. That last infirmity of noble mind, to scorn delights and live laborious days, but the fair guerdon when we hope to find, and think to burst out into sudden blaze, comes the blind fury with the abhorred shears, and slits the thin spun life. But not the praise, Phoebus replied, and touching my trembling ears, fame is no plant that grows on mortal soil, nor in the glistening foil sets off to the world, nor in broad rumor lies. Okay, the Furies. There were three blind Furies. There was Atropos, Clotho, and Lachesis. So Atropos would, Clotho spun the cloth of your life, decided, then Lachesis measured it out. How long is your life going to be? And then when your life is over, the blind fury Atropos cuts the thread, the cloth of your life, and then you die. And of course, atropos is where we get our word atrophy. There are so many classical allusions in poems. You just have to take classical literature, even if it's just to understand poetry. But we have so many classical allusions just in our culture that nobody knows where they came from unless they study classical literature. And it is a great foil to reading the Old Testament, because you realize that the Old Testament is just thousands of years ahead of their time with their literature compared with the classical, for example, Iliad and Odyssey, where they think writing is back 1200 BC, where they think writing is wicked or from devils or something like that. And by 1200 BC, we're in the time of the judges, and the Jewish people are writing everything down. Excuse me. It's really amazing. So it's great to study classical literature just to appreciate the Old Testament more. By contrast, so living laborious days, they hope to find things, and here comes the blind fury and cuts his life off, his thin spun life. But the fury can't cut off the praise. Phoebus replied, and when you see Phoebus, you need to know that's Apollos. Phoebus is the god of this, Phoebus Apollo. And so when you learn classical literature, he's the one, he's the god of the sun. And so not the and Phoebus Apollo also played music. So he's a god that is in charge of a lot of music too, but not the praise. Phoebus Apollo replied, "You can't cut off his praise," and touched my trembling ears. Uh, Fame is no plant that grows on mortal soil. The three blind muses can't cut off your fame because it's not mortal. You can't cut it off. Fame can live forever. Nor in the glistening foil. Gems are set in a type of gold, sometimes even a gold foil on the back so that they sparkle more. So nor in the glistening foil set off to the world, nor in broad rumor lies, but lives and spreads aloft by those pure eyes and perfect witness of all judging Jove. As he pronounces lastly on each deed of so much fame in heaven, expect thy meed. O fountain Arethusa, and thou honored flood, smooth sliding Mincius, crowned with vocal reeds. That strain I heard was of a higher mood. So elevated language, a higher mood. But now my oat proceeds and listens to the herald of the sea. And that would be Triton, because he carries a trumpet, that came in Neptune's plea. He asked the waves and asked the felon winds, the bad winds, what hard mishap hath doomed this gentle swain, and questioned every gust of rugged wings that blows from off each beaked promontory. They knew not of his story. And sage Hippocrates their answer brings, that not a blast was from his dungeon strayed. The air was calm, and on the level brine sleek Panope with all her sisters played. It was that fatal and perfidious bark. But in the eclipse, and rigged with curses dark, that sunk so low that sacred head of thine, next Camus, reverend sire, went footing slow, his mantle hairy and his bonnet sedge, inwrought with figures dim and on the edge, like to that sanguine flower inscribed with O. So with woe, the hyacinth was thought to be, in classical allusions, thought to be made from the blood of hyacinth, someone Apollo accidentally killed. And so it's inscribed with woe. Ah, who hath reft, quoth he, my dearest pledge? At last came and last did go, the pilot of the Gallian lake. 2 massy keys he bore of metals twain. Now he's talking about Peter and the keys, and Jesus giving the keys to Peter if you're Catholic. 2 massy keys he bore of metals twain. The golden opes the iron shuts amain. So Peter was thought to have the keys to heaven and hell. One opens the gates of heaven, one opens the gate of hell. He shook his mitred locks. And of course, mitre, that'd be the hair under the mitre. That's what a Catholic bishop would wear. He shook his mitred locks and stern bespake, how well could I have spared for thee, young swain, enow of such as for their belly's sake creep and intrude and climb into the fold, or other care they little reckoning make, then how to scramble at the shearer's feast and shove away the worthy bidden guest. Blind mouths that scarce themselves know how to hold a sheep hook or have learned aught else the least. That to the faithful herdman's art belongs. What recks it them? What need they? They are sped. And when they list, their lean and flashy songs grate on their scrannel pipes of wretched straw. The hungry sheep look up and are not fed, but swollen with wind and the rank mist they draw, rot inwardly in foul contagion spread. Besides what the grim wolf with privy paw. Wow, this is quite a slam on the Catholic Church. The grim wolf. The sheep look up and are not fed. We're the sheep, and the church isn't feeding us in this instance here in this poem. Besides what the grim wolf with privy paw daily devours apace, and nothing said, but that 2-handed engine at the door stands ready to smite once and smite no more. So he's talking about a 2-handed engine, this sword that you grab with both your hands and whack, there you go. Return, Alpheus. And Alpheus is the personification of a river in Greece, also the god who fell in love with Arethusa and pursued her until she was turned into a fountain. And that's from Ovid's Metamorphosis. Ovid was about the time of Jesus. Ovid's Metamorphosis is a book of how all the gods came to be. And of course, the gods and goddesses have multiple stories of how they came to be. Athena came out of Zeus. Zeus's head. He had a splitting headache, and he had somebody split his head open. Zeus, the main god, and Athena just popped out full grown. So Ovid's Metamorphosis is the story of how the gods and goddesses are born. That's part of classical lit. Don't look for consistency because there are multiple stories. Return, Alpheus. The dread voice is past that shrunk thy steams. Return, Sicilian muse, and call the vales and bid them hither cast their bells and florets of 1,000 hues. Ye valleys low where the mild whispers use of shades and wanton winds. Wanton winds is a great phrase for poetry. The wanton winds implies they just blow wherever they want to go, like a bad lady of the night. Wanton winds of shades and wanton winds and gushing brooks, on whose fresh lap the swart star, Sirius, sparely looks. Throw hither all your quaint enameled eyes, that on the green turf suck the honeyed showers, and purple all the ground with vernal flowers. Bring the wrath primrose, that forsaken dies, the tufted crow-toe, these are flowers, and pale jessamine, the white pink and the pansy, freaked with jet, the glowing violet, the musk rose and the well-attired woodbine, with cowslips wan that hang the pensive head, and every flower that sad embroidery wears, bid amaranthus all his beauty shed, and daffodils fill their cups with tears. So even the flowers are reacting. To strew the laureate, and of course the laureate is a person honored. We have laureate poets in America, and they have laureate poets in Britain. It's a high distinction. To strew the laureate hearse where Lycidas lies, for so to interpose a little ease, let our frail thoughts daily with false surmise. Ay me, whilst thee the shores and sounding seas wash far away where'er thy bones are hurled. I don't know if my loved one drowned and the body wasn't found, if this would be very comforting to me. While your body, where'er thy bones are hurled, where beyond the stormy Hebrides, where thou perhaps under the whelming tide, whilst visitest the bottom of the monstrous world, or whether thou to our moist vows denied, slepst by the fable of Bellerus, a giant. That's Land's End was called Bellarium in Romans' time, and they thought there was this giant Bellerus, where the great vision of the guarded mount looks toward Nemancus and Bayona's hold. Look homeward, angel now, and melt with ruth. Ah, and ah, O ye dolphins, waft the hapless youth. Weep no more, woeful shepherds, weep no more, for Lycidas, your sorrow, is not dead. Sunk though he be beneath the watery floor, so sinks the day star in the ocean bed, and yet anon repairs his drooping head. Okay, even the day star, the sun goes down, but it comes up again. So he's talking resurrection metaphors here. And yet anon repairs his drooping head, and tricks his beams, and with new spangled ore flames in the forehead of the morning sky. So Lycidas sunk low, but mounted high through the dear might of him that walked the waves. So he's talking about resurrection from Jesus, the guy that walked on waves. Were where other groves and other streams along, with nectar pure his oozy locks he loves, and hears the unexpressed nuptial song, the wedding song of the resurrection, and the blessed kingdoms meet of joy and love. There entertain him all the saints above, in solemn troops and sweet societies, that sing and singing in their glory move. This is really beautiful. He's gone from being rather more morose to this glorious vision of Lycidas rising in the resurrection to the marriage supper of the Lamb with this flames in the forehead of his morning sky. That's almost an allusion to the Iliad when Achilles gets extra power from Athena, and she lets his head have these flames coming out of his head to make him look important. And so Milton might even be borrowing this from the Iliad. He would have been extremely familiar with the Iliad in the Greek. Amazing, really. That sing and singing in their glory move and wipe the tears forever from his eyes. That's a direct allusion to Revelation 7:17. Now, Lycidas, the shepherds weep no more. Henceforth, thou art the genius of the shore, in thy large recompense, and shalt be good to all that wander in that perilous flood. Thus sang the uncouth swain to the oaks and rills, while the still morn went out with sandals gray. He touched the tender stops of various quills, these are quill pens, with eager thought, warbling his Doric lay. So his song that he's writing. And now the sun hath stretched out all the hills, and now has dropped into the western bay. At last he rose and twitched his mantle blue. And this is right out of Virgil's Eclogue 10. Tomorrow to fresh woods and pastures new. Isn't that beautiful? So he starts, I think it's rather morose, and then he just gets, it ends with this incredible comparison to resurrection, so that his family would feel good. He's at the supper, of the marriage supper of the Lamb. L'allegro means lively, gay, or merry. L'allegro. Now it's used as a musical term to indicate a brisk pace, right? Something lively, gay, merry. L'allegro. That is used as a music term. It's nearly impossible to understand and appreciate John Milton's L'allegro. I have to even look at the pronunciation. L'allegro, pronunciation on that second syllable, without also having read its companion poem, Il Penseroso, and that's why we are reading both. Whereas L'allegro is the happy person who spends an idealized day in the country and a festive evening in the city. Il Penseroso is the thoughtful person whose night is filled with meditative walking in the woods and hours of study in a lonely tower. The poem was first published in 1645. The two poems complement each other structurally. They're companions. They are, vice and versa. And they contain images that are specifically in dialogue with one another. So the poems talk to one another. And if we go to our page, syllabus, page 260, please, at this time. At the bottom of the page, you have the beginning of L'allegro. In line 11, so if you're looking at page 260, you have to count down to line 11. They're marked by 5s and 10s. But come thou goddess, fair and free. And this would be he's looking for help. So he invites the goddess Mirth to entertain him, because this is, it's a fun, happy poem. And so he wants the goddess Mirth to entertain him with this. There are multiple Virgilian, Homeric, and other classical references to gods and goddesses. The website below has a really cool annotated reading of the poem, www.dartmouth.edu/Milton. And they have some really cool English stuff, and they have an annotated reading, which means they tell you what it means as they're kind of going along. There's a pensive melancholy celebrated in Il Penseroso. It represents the Apollonian life of study, as opposed to L'allegro's emphasis on a Dionysian pleasure-seeking lifestyle. And so again, we see these two opposites, where we have that Apollonian and Dionysian lifestyle. The Apollonian is calm and orderly, named after Apollo, because he brings up the sun every day, takes it down every night. And then the Dionysian, named after Dionysius, who is pleasure-seeking, drugs and alcohol guy. You can look up your Apollonian, I'm not sure if it's in the A's or the D's, in your Britlet syllabus and read about a little bit. That has been assigned before. You can decide which lifestyle Milton prefers. A careful reading of both poems will reveal Milton's his preference. What does he like to do? Going back to that, L'Allegro, if you're on page 260 in your syllabus, he says, hence loathed melancholy of Cerberus. Cerberus is that guardian of hell with the three heads, the three-headed dog, and blackest midnight born in Stygian cave forlorn, mongst horrid shapes and shrieks and sights unholy, find out some uncouth cell where brooding darkness spreads his jealous wings, and the night raven sings. There under ebon shades, like ebony, dark, black wool, under ebon shades and low-browed rocks, as raggy as thy locks, in dark Cimmerian desert ever dwell. But come, thou goddess fair and free, in heaven ye clept Eurythmy. So ye clept is named Euryphryne. That's the goddess of mirth, one of the three graces. And this is the Cimmerian is directly out of Homer. If you have read the Iliad, the Lattimore translation is what I suggest in the Iliad. That is in the Odyssey. That's the Homeric land. In the Odyssey, if you're taking notes, the Odyssey, book 11, lines 13 to 19, talk about this Cimmerian desert. And it just helps you, if you are familiar with Homer, it helps you to realize how cool Milton is for being so familiar in Homer. And he uses all of these Homeric references that we read once and don't hang on to, but he has studied them to the point that he can actually use them. The studies that I have read say that you need to encounter a word 17 times before you make it your own. After you have read a word, the first time you look it up, you don't know what it is, you look it up or you learn what it is. And the next time you might have to look it up again or look up your note you wrote in the book the first time you saw it. But by the time you've encountered that word 17 times, you know it well enough to use it as your own, and you start using it in conversation. Sometimes you start studying Homer or Milton or Shakespeare, and you realize that you start using those words. I do that all the time because I've been teaching for so long that I use some of these metaphors and some of these words, and then I have to use think-arounds to explain it in words that everyday people understand. Not that I'm so smart, I'm just so immersed in Shakespeare and Milton and all these guys because I've been teaching and reading and reading and reading and reading and rereading for so many years. You are going to be reading this week beautiful poems. Milton's poem, On His Having Arrived at the Age of 23. It's such a cool poem. And of course, you can find everything from Milton on the internet too. I'm looking for what page that is. Page 264. Page 264, let's see. And when the assault was intended to the city, that's also on page 264, to the Lord General Cromwell on the late massacre at Piedmont. And your syllabus has a little note that explains of what massacre occurred and why Milton wrote the poem. We also have some information on 270 and 271 about on his blindness and that massacre at Piedmont. And then On His Blindness is a beautiful, beautiful poem. Then on page 265, we start with On the Morning of Christ's Nativity. And On the Morning of Christ's Nativity was written in 1629. If you're making notes, annotations onto your syllabus, page 265. Milton wrote On His Blindness in 1629 when he was 21 years old. 21 years old. He uses 6 lines of iambic pentameter, and then he kind of switches. The first 4 stanzas, they're labeled 1, 2, 3, 4 in Roman numerals on syllabus page 265. The first 4 stanzas, those make up the proem, the introduction to this long poem. And then it says on your syllabus page, after the 1, 2, 3, 4 in Roman numerals, then it says the hymn, and the hymn 1. and we have no more iambic pentameter after that point. The hymn or the ode, and he follows his own form with various line lengths and different. The rhyme scheme is different too. If you look at the hymn, so on the bottom of page 265, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you have to turn the page to get to the rest of them. But if you look at that, the 2 first lines rhyme of each stanza, the 2 first lines rhyme. Then you have, so they're AA, line 3 is B, then line 4 and 5 are CC, and then B for line 2, 4, line 6, and then the last 2 lines rhyme, but the meter is different. And so it's very unusual what he's done with his rhyme form, and they don't all match. Well, they do. They pretty much follow that pattern, the pattern of AA, B, CC, B, DD. So if you're looking at one of those stanzas, mark the hymn, where you have the recurrence of the Roman numerals. For example, at the top of page 265, if you've got your pencil or pen, top of 265 of our syllabus, and it says number 2, and then it has line numbers 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44. You can mark those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we have 8 lines in one stanza, and the pattern for those 8 lines is AA, fair and air, B is snow, then CC, shame and blame, and B with throw, so the snow and throw, and then the last 2 lines, eyes and deformities. You could say eyes, ease. You can pronounce these differently to make them rhyme, but they rhyme. They're supposed to rhyme. If you're taking notes, you don't need to remember all that, but you do need to remember that this is really quite a profound poem that he wrote on the morning of Christmas morning. Amazing. You even have notes. You have notes for this poem because the poem itself is how many stanzas? Is 27 stanzas and takes up syllabus pages 265 through 268, and beginning on 268 is the cool fun stuff, because these are the footnotes that explain some of the more obscure parts of that poem on the morning of Christ's nativity. Really, really cool. You actually have on the massacre at Piedmont, and when I consider how my light is spent, you have that in your syllabus twice. Not sure how that happened, but whenever it happened, it was 27 years ago. So we're not going to fix it now. When I consider how my light is spent, it's on page 270, and you have lots of footnotes in your syllabus. You can compare, if you're familiar with Shakespeare's sonnets, you can compare Shakespeare's sonnet 15, which is when I consider. And it's hard to say if Milton is saying, well, when I consider how my light is spent. Just like saying how my money is all spent. My light is all spent. I'm almost blind. When I consider how my light is spent, ere half my days in this dark world. So he thinks half his life is over. This is written sometime between 1651 and 1655. He's mourning his sight, Paradise Lost. You'll see a reference to that if you're taking notes. In Paradise Lost, in book 3, lines 22 to 55. Also in his sonnet 22. Amazing. But this is a huge loss to him. And so it is interesting that he would write a poem about this. He did, this is not half of his life. His father lived to be 84, and so he must be, it's hard to say what he's thinking about ere half my days. He hasn't even lived half his life, and he's blind. And what is his primary purpose in life? Is to write literature and poetry. That's the gift God gave him. So that has some personal application for us. What is your purpose in life, and has something been taken from you and you think you still can't fulfill that purpose? But look at Milton, and we're talking 400 years ago. When I consider how my light is spent, ere half my days in this dark world and wide, and that one talent, which is death to hide, lodged with me useless, thought though my soul more bent to serve therewith my Maker and present my true account, lest he returning chide. Doth God exact day labor, light denied? Okay, these first 7 lines, he says, when I think about how I'm almost blind, I'm not even halfway through my life, I'm in this dark world, and 400 years ago, that's a pretty dark world. There's no Braille. And that one talent that he has, which is writing and writing poetry, that's just death to him to hide it. If he can't write it, he might as well be dead. Lodged with him in his useless, though his soul is even more bent to serve his master, to serve God, and present my true account. He's even more all about Jesus than ever. And he wants to present his true account. What have I done with my life when the time comes? He's going to be judged. Lest when Jesus comes at the rapture, when he comes, and lest he returning chide, say, hey, you didn't get much done after you turned blind. Then the second half of the poem, doth God exact day labor, light denied? I fondly ask, but patience to prevent that murmur soon replies, God doth not need either man's work or his own gifts, who best bear his mild yoke, they serve him best. His state is kingly, thousands at his bidding speed, and post o'er land and ocean without rest. They also serve who only stand and wait. Imagine the application of this beautiful poem for a Christian who all of a sudden has some type of paralysis, or loses a limb, or loses their hearing, or speech, or heaven help us, sight. You can still read Milton through Braille and audio. So he's saying, does he expect day labor? Does he expect me to keep working without light in my eyes, without being able to see? But patience to prevent that murmur. So he's just about to complain to God and say, really, God? But patience who replies, God doesn't need your work. He doesn't need your gifts. The people who bear the mild yoke he's giving them, and talking about a mild yoke, he's going right back to Matthew 11:30. Take my yoke. God doesn't need you. They serve him best. His state is kingly. Thousands at his bidding speed and go and do whatever he wants, but also people serve him who only stand and wait. There are a lot of people who get to just stand around and tell other people about Jesus and wait for his return. There's some people who are injured so badly, they're not going to be able to go out and be a missionary or do the cool things they wanted to do as a Christian. They're just waiting for Jesus. And that's okay too. But for the person who's been struggling with cancer for 10 years, they're just waiting. We had a friend who had cancer for more than 10 years. And for most of that, she was completely confined to her house with very few times she could leave the house. She was just waiting. She always said she felt like all her friends had come to her train to say goodbye, and then the train didn't leave. She just had to wait. But this poem, the oftener you read it, the more you're going to like it. This is such a cool poem, especially if you have some type of infirmity that God is asking you to live with. This is really amazing. On the morning of Christ's nativity, we'll read a little bit of it here. Back to page syllabus 265, I read just a few lines from that. This is the month, and this the happy morn, wherein the Son of Heaven's eternal King, of wedded maid and virgin mother born, our great redemption from above did bring. For so the holy sages once did sing, referring to all the prophets who said Jesus would be born, that he our deadly forfeit should release, because our deadly forfeit, we're due to death, and he came to release us from that judgment of death, and with his Father work us a perpetual peace. This is really amazing theology for 400 years ago. We all have access to Bible software and Bible software online that's free, and and Logos Bible software that we pay $800,000 for, so that we can have proper theology. We'll talk about Milton's theology in a later class. He does not have perfect theology, but he doesn't have access to everything that we do, and all the preachers and all the vlogs and the blogs and a podcast. Now we have access to all the information that we like, and of course some of them are heretics, but we have access to a lot of really good preaching and teaching also. And so, but he went with his Father, work us a perpetual peace, not just peace. He even throws in the word perpetual, maybe to match the meter, but maybe because it's just good theology, that we're always going to Jesus and repenting and then having our sins covered, and we have this peace. So he's very, very much Protestant, not Catholic. It was written when he was 21 years old, which is absolutely amazing. And it is divided into those two sections. The first 4 stanzas are the proem, if you're using a highlighter or a pen. And each of these have that pentameter that I mentioned before. Stanza 2, and we're going all the way back. I've got my syllabus right here. On the morning of Christ's nativity, which goes back to page 265 in your syllabus, 265. That glorious form, that light unsufferable, and that far beaming blaze of majesty, wherewith he wanted heaven's high council table to sit in the midst of trinal unity, he laid aside, and here with us to be. That is straight out of, he laid aside his glory, Philippians 2:7-9. He laid aside, and here with us to be, forsook the courts of everlasting day, and chose with us a darksome house of mortal clay. He left his glory behind, and chose to be enclosed in this mortal house of clay, this human flesh. Say, heavenly muse, shall not thy sacred vein afford a present to the infant God? Hast thou no verse, no hymn, or solemn strain to welcome him to this his new abode? Now, while the heaven by the sun's team untrod hath took no print of the approaching light, and all the spangled host keep watch in squadrons bright? See how from far upon the eastern road the star-led wizards haste with odors sweet, and that would be the wise men. Oh, run, prevent them with thy humble ode, and lay it lowly at his blessed feet. Have thou the honor first thy Lord to greet, and join thy voice unto the angel choir, from out his secret altar, touched with hallowed fire. Okay, and you've got 27 more stanzas where he kind of creates his own firm, and it has been called the hymn, or some call it the ode, and the lines in each stanza even vary. Each terminates, however, with a rhyming couplet. The rhyme scheme follows A, B, C, C, B, D, D, as I pointed out in an earlier slide. You've got annotations in your syllabus copy of this poem, and I hope you enjoy it. Now I'm touching on a book by Harold Bloom called The Western Canon. It's a good book. He's not a Christian, and I don't agree with everything he says, but he has amazing commentary on some Western literature. And he says, what makes Paradise Lost so unique is its startling blend of Shakespearean tragedy, Virgilian epic, and biblical prophecy. And that's from the Western Canon, my copy. And I've given you the page numbers. So Shakespearean tragedy, Virgilian epic, and biblical prophecy. Now, the biblical prophecy all comes true in Paradise Lost. Virgilian epic, and that would be Homeric epic too, is a little bit odd after Jesus Christ. And of course, Paradise Lost, John Milton is writing 1600 years after the life of Jesus. And so 1600 years, it's kind of hard to tell a story in a Virgilian or a Homeric style because it's so tragic. And we have the resurrection and the rescue of Jesus. And so it's kind of hard for anything to be tragic. Even in Shakespearean tragedy, we do see that there is hope And that would be, I agree with him about Shakespearean tragedy, because there's always hope. You can have characters who do really bad things, but at the end repent, like King Lear. It's tragic because he finds out too late that his good daughter really is his good daughter. He thought she was his bad daughter. And it ends with him carrying her body out on stage and kind of collapsing in tears. It's not really exciting to see, and he screams a lot. But Shakespearean tragedy, you've got this redemption. He will be forgiven. Whereas, for example, the opposite would be Macbeth, a play like Shakespeare's Macbeth, where Macbeth never repents. He fights right till the end, and then they carry his head out on stage on a pole at the end. Great play, short play. And even that has a little bit of Jesus' rescue at the end, because in Macbeth, the king's son gets to come to the throne and all is right again once they get rid of Macbeth. So it is true. He's got some of this in Paradise Lost. It's really, it is a startling blend of these three things. And that's what makes it such a cool book to read. Excuse me. Okay. Sometimes I pause when I have these coughing fits, and sometimes I just let you see it. Shakespearean tragedy. This is where a character makes a tragic choice, and that provides the plot. In Shakespearean tragedy, for example, King Lear, he makes a really bad choice. He decides to retire early, and his three daughters are going to be in charge, and he picks the two bad daughters instead of the one good daughter, and he thinks the one good daughter is bad. So he makes this tragic choice. That provides the entire plot of the play, and at the end he repents. It's too late, but he repents, and so he can be forgiven. And in Macbeth, the character makes a tragic choice. Macbeth decides to fight till the end and realizes the witches tricked him, and you should never listen to witches anyway. And King James of England really liked this story of witches. Only Shakespeare could get by with a play, Macbeth, in 1603, where you have three witches come out on stage to begin with, chanting and having a brew, a witch's brew that they're throwing frogs' legs and snakes and things like that into. But they make this tragic choice. And then that provides the plot of the play. And so that's also true in Paradise Lost. Virgilian epic. So Virgil wrote the Aeneid around the time of Christ. He wrote the Aeneid, but he wrote it as though it's right after Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. So the Trojan War, the Iliad's all about the Trojan War, and that was written 1200 BC was the war, and then Homer was written hundreds of years after that. So you've got the Iliad, where the Greeks go and fight the Trojans, and and the Greeks burn Troy down to the ground and take all the gold and get their woman back and all that kind of stuff. And then the Odyssey is all of these Greek heroes trying to make especially Odysseus, trying to make his way back home, and how long it takes him to get back home, and how the gods, if his god is out having a picnic somewhere, then a god that hates him could come and sink his ship or try and kill him or something like that. But it's all about destiny, because the fates, think of Clothos, Lycidas, and Atropos. The fates have, your destiny's already set. And then, so the Aeneid is written as though the Roman hero who escaped Troy was burned to the ground, but the Roman hero Aeneas, that's what the Aeneid is all about, he escaped, and then his journey to go found the city of Rome. So Virgil, who lived during the time of Christ, just a little before, Virgil is telling this story as though the story took place. So it's quite propaganda. As though this story took place right after Troy is burned to the ground. And instead of the story of the Greeks and the Odyssey going back home, this is the story of Aeneas, the Trojan hero, going and founding a new place because Troy's destroyed. And so he's going to go and develop Rome, which would be the second Reich, if you want to use Germany. And that's what Hitler had hoped, was to establish the Third Reich. You've heard the Third Reich. So that would be Troy and then Rome. And then it was going to be Germany during World War II. But that's another big, long story. So Virgilian epic is referring to the Aeneid. If you take classical lit, yes, you're going to read the Aeneid, and it is pretty cool. And there is the Thelma read aloud for all of the Iliad, for all of the Odyssey, and for all of the Aeneid. And that's all at Thelma's library, and it's all free. Then biblical prophecy, what's found in the Bible, all the things that are said about Jesus. And Milton is going to mention quite a few of these things, that these things are happening. And so Paradise Lost, if you haven't decided already, it's a cool story. Cool story. The Epigram on Milton. And this is written by John Dryden, a poet from just after the time of Milton. John Dryden wrote this epigram for him. And he says, 3 poets in 3 distant ages born, Greece, Italy, and England did adorn. The first in loftiness of thought surpassed, the next in majesty, in both the last. The force of nature could no further go. To make a third, she joined the former 2. So he's talking about Greece, that would be Homer, the writer Homer, Iliad and Odyssey. Italy, that would be Virgil, and with his Aeneid, and then England, and that would be Milton. And that's his opinion, that Milton is simply the summation of Virgil and Homer, and you can't do any better than that. It's actually a pretty cool epigram. All right, Milton quizzing. This is what you read last week, book 1, line 1 to book 2, line 600. My suggestion, you have a printed version of this with the questions, the citations, and the answers. This is available to teachers in session number 16. And I always suggest that teachers print that out. You could choose, instead of listening to me, read the question and then give a pause and then tell you the answer, which means you have to stop your video, look it up, try and find out, time it for 30 or 40 seconds, and then come with the answer. But you can do that if you've got a remote control and it seems to work well. I'll wait about 10 seconds in between the question and the answer. And there are 100 questions today. So for your last 45 minutes, you really need to do, they need to be fast. You need to allow no more than about 30, 45 seconds. And even if people are going crazy because they can't quite get the answer and you say, oh, too late, here's the answer, they're going to learn these answers. And they'll learn how to look things up in Paradise Lost. They've got their books there and they could go from book to book, from line to line, and they'll get into it pretty quickly. The other option is that you could simply do it in class. You could, if you have a whiteboard, you could write down the reference one by one, write down the reference, have someone write down the reference on the whiteboard for you while someone else is reading the question, and then have a bell or use a timer or something to make it more fun, and give them 30 seconds or 45 seconds to find that the first person who raises their hand. Or if you are in a group, in a classroom, then I usually break into teams and each person from the team has to answer, so that you can't have one person always answer all the questions. One person who really read well and mark their book up. So that's how it's done. And I'm going to allow about 10 seconds in between each question. And this is not graded. The idea is review so that you actually know what you read. Okay, who does Milton ask to help him? And the hint is it's just like Homer and in the Aeneid with Virgil. It's just like Homer and Virgil. Yes, he asks the heavenly muse. And in a Christian context, that would be the Holy Spirit. He asks the Holy Spirit. What is Milton's expressed purpose in writing this poem? Yes, to justify the ways of God to man. This is important. You need to highlight that, mark it up in your book. Book 1, line 26, you need to know this. What was the cause behind Satan's rebellion? His pride. And of course, that's theologically correct. And you should mark that in your book. In book 1, line 36, you should mark that. That's his pride. So that when you're writing your paper, if you need these things that are important, you'll know where they are in your books. So you should all have your books open, searching for these one at a time. I don't expect you to memorize all these because part of this is context. What is adamantine referring to? And this is only if you read the footnote. It's the legendary hardest substance. They'll call it adamant or adamantine, and people usually understand that that's diamond. It's the hardest substance. How long do the rebel angels fall? And this is important because it's classical illusion. Compares with Homer. 9 days. When they fall, they're falling for 9 days. That's a big deal. Who is Satan's second in command? Beelzebub. And from here forward, I may refer to him as simply Bub, because I think it's funny when they fall and he says, "You okay? You okay, Bub?" It just sounds funnier than Beelzebub. But don't use Bub in your paper. But what does Satan say he will never do? He will never bow before God. Define ignominy. Did anybody look it up? Anybody got a footnote? Ignominy is a total loss of dignity and self-respect, or an incurring of public disgrace. And this is a big deal in Paradise Lost because Satan has been publicly humiliated. Can angels die? No. What will the fallen angels delight in? In doing ill or evil. There are so many Shakespearean similarities that I could refer you to, or biblical things. Shakespeare's play, oh, I knew I wouldn't be able to remember it if I didn't write myself a note. Book 1, I hope you're looking these up as we go. Line 160, book 1, line 160. Be ever to do ill, our sole delight, is what they say. In line 160, in Paradise Lost, this is just like Shakespeare's character Aaron in Titus Andronicus. If you look up Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus in Act 5, Scene 1, line 10, that's what Aaron says. He lives to just do evil. And so Milton, it's kind of cool that Milton has the angels say this. That's what they're going to delight in. To what is Satan's monstrous size compared to? It's compared to 5 big things. He's compared to the Titans, Breris, Typhon, Tarsus, and Leviathan. Leviathan, at least you know what it is, a great big giant sea creature. The others, those are classical illusions. What is Satan's mindset about his new home? The mind can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven. They don't really have a choice. So they're telling themselves, we can make a heaven of hell. Yeah, we can make this place kind of like heaven. What does Satan say is the only thing that makes God greater than him? You might use this in a paper. Thunder. Satan completely misunderstands who and what God is and who and what Jesus is. He just completely misunderstands everything. And this is where Paradise Lost kind of gets comedic sometimes. What's Satan's thesis or his main point? Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. This is a great quote if you are writing a paper about angels or about Satan in particular, or the angels or their attitude or something like that. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Highlight that or mark that in your book. What does this simile refer to? Remember, simile uses like or as. It's referring to the Israelite exodus from Egypt, led by Moses, found in Exodus 14. How many rebel angels are there? Numberless. They can't even count them. There are a lot of them. What happened to the names of the fallen angels in the records of heaven? They were blotted out. I have a reference if you want to check Psalm 69:28. What did the fallen angels become to humanity? Deities and idols. So Milton believes that these fallen angels, and that's why he chooses some of the names that he does. You might recognize the names of these fallen angels and think, I think I've read these names as the pagan gods in the Old Testament. And yes, those are the names he gives them. So Milton thinks that the deities and idols in the Old Testament might be some of these fallen angels. How does Satan revive his forces? With high words that give them courage and dispel their fears. Kind of hard to have high words when you've all been cast out into hell, but he's giving them high words. And we're going to see all these formal speeches and Homeric style similes, which mean very, very long similes. If you haven't read Iliad or Odyssey, then you're at a little bit of a loss, but you have all that information is in your glossary. I'm not sure what the key words are, maybe Homeric or something, but very easy to find this and then understand that these are Homeric things. What do the rebel angels do? They form united ranks and wait for orders. Describe Satan's appearance. Okay, not devoid of all original brightness, subdued glory, shining darkly, scars on his face, careworn cheeks, but still courageous and vengeful pride, cruel but sympathetic eyes. If your students are reading, but if they're finding, they raise their hand, but they've got the place and they're ready to read a few things about his appearance. I was always okay with that with my students, and you're fine to do that. I don't expect people to remember these things. Who is the only one that exceeds the fallen angels? The Almighty. What does Satan say the angels can do? He says they can regain heaven. And this is where we laugh. You know, it's hard. It becomes comedy to me. Satan says, we'll go back and we'll take heaven back. We'll throw God out and we'll take over. Who do the angels say is to blame for their fall? God. It's God's fault because he concealed all his strength, which tempted them to challenge him. It does become comedic. What is the fame in heaven? And that would be rumor. What's the rumor in heaven? That God would create a new race. And here Milton's guessing. Who is Mammon? He taught men to dig for treasures in the earth. He is Mulciber from the Paradise Lost text. So mammon is often used as another word for money. So Mammon taught men to dig for treasures, gold, silver, diamonds, valuables in the earth. Mammon is Mulciber. Who is Mulciber to the Greeks? Because every culture renames the god. So who is Mulciber to the Greeks? To the Greeks, he's Hephaestus. And this one is extra credit if you're giving points because it's not in the Paradise Lost text. Hephi, they call him Hephaestus, and in classical lit, we call him Hephi. He's the god of the underground, the god of the dragging footsteps. He's lame. His mother threw him out of heaven and kind of busted his legs up. He's god of foraging, jewels, metals, underground things. He's underground with his forge. His symbol is the anvil and hammer. I always teach my class to think of the gods and goddesses as little Mattel toy packages. They hang on the wall in the toy store, and you get the gods. So, for example, you'd have Hephaestus, and his legs would be crooked, and then you'd get a little plastic anvil and a little plastic hammer. And he's older. He would have a beard, and he'd come with, little toys like that. Very much like Spider-Man or Superman. Superman comes with a cape. Spider-Man might come with a little thing to put on his wrist that, in a plastic web or something. So Hephaestus is the god of the underground. And I just want you to learn that, even if you haven't taken classical lit yet. What is the palace of Satan called? I hope you all know this. Pandemonium. Pandemonium. And why is it called pandemonium? If you do any language studies, especially Greek, pan means all, and then demon. So the place of all the demons, pandemonium. And that's why people might use it as a metaphor. Sometimes they'll say, it was pandemonium. Means it was crazy in there. Like all hell broke loose. It was pandemonium. In fact, that's where all hell broke loose, pandemonium, because you've got all of these demons there, and that's their palace. Oh, what does pandemonium mean? And I just told you. So that's not extra. It means all demons. Learn it. Simply learn it. Sorry, I spoiled it. To what are the fallen angels compared in this Homeric simile? They're compared to bees. Homer, when Homer is in the Iliad and he's talking about all the people getting together to talk about something, he'll give this long simile. It was just like, and then he gives a big long story about the bees. And then he goes back to they were having a meeting. So it's a Homeric simile, and he compares them to bees because he's imitating Homer. What happens to the less important rebel angels when they enter pandemonium? Oh, I don't have the answer. What happens to the rebel angels? I'm gonna have to look it up. 1777. I think I remember, but I don't want to say that. Let's see. 177. 1777. 1777. I should have followed along. Book 1. Are you marking your books like I do? I have them all marked out. Okay. Behold a wonder. They but now who seemed in bigness to surpass earth's giant sons, now less than smallest dwarfs. In narrow room throng numberless, like, and here's another Homeric simile. What are they like? Like that Pygmalion race beyond the Indian mount, or fairy elves whose midnight revels by a forest side a fountain some belated peasant sees, or dreams he sees. So they're just like these little people. That's what they're like. So these angels are basically shrink to fit. I like that. I think if you listen to me reading aloud, Paradise Lost, I say all of these funny things that I've written in the margins of my copy. If I ever lose my copy, I always said if I ever lose my copy, I can't teach Paradise Lost anymore, because I've looked up all the biblical references and I have all my funny comments, and I've looked up all the Shakespeare references, and so that I can say it immediately when I'm reading it and appear to be kind of smart. Book 2. What does Satan encourage the demonic host to attempt? regain heaven. Let's go get and regain heaven. And I realize it's kind of repetitive from book 1. What 2 methods does Satan propose to regain heaven? By war or by guile. So by deceit, sneakily or by attack. Who is Moloch and which path, war or deceit, does he suggest? Does Moloch suggest war or trickery? Moloch is the fiercest, strongest spirit of heaven's battle. He preferred not to exist than to be inferior. And when he found himself that way, he lost all fear. He supports war. What is Moloch's reasoning for choosing war rather than deceit to regain heaven? There can be nothing worse than suffering endlessly, banished from heaven. Therefore, there's nothing to fear from attacking heaven again, because annihilation would be better than their current state. And this is kind of sad. They're saying, "Oh, we may as well attack heaven. If he sends us back here, big whoop. Maybe he'll annihilate us. That'd be better than living here." Very sad, isn't it? What is Belial like? Describe him as described here. He's very fair, he's manipulative, having low thoughts, but persuasive words. What does Belial suggest here? He says that eventually God might consider their punishment fulfilled. Their bodies would become used to the conditions of hell, and then it wouldn't seem so terrible. Maybe God will finish punishing them, or maybe they'll just get used to it. How does Mammon feel about being received into heaven again? He cannot spend eternity in subjection and in worship to one whom he hates. So Mammon doesn't want to go to heaven. He doesn't want to be subject to somebody that he hates. There's no repentance here. What plan of action does Mammon advise? Mammon advises that they wait and plan evil, but not war. What is the response of the other angels to Mammon's speech? Great applause. This is very Homeric. What do the rebel angels fear? They fear the thunder of God, and they fear the sword of Michael. And we'll be reading about that. Explain what Beelzebub says here. He's saying that God still rules over hell, just as he rules over heaven. So Beelzebub kind of realizes it's not like they're on their own. God still rules. What is man? A new race created by like the angels, but less powerful and excellent, but favored more by God. That's us. What does Beelzebub suggest they do to this new race? He suggests that they see if they can attack this new world and cause the race to rebel against and join their forces. And this is pretty good theology. Satan trying to ruin us. Who will undertake to spy on the new world? Satan alone. That's rather selfish. It sounds brave, but he wants to leave there, doesn't he? What does Satan say is the lot or the fate of a ruler? Hazard and honor. He has the honor of ruling them, but he has the hazard of risking all to go spy on the new world. What do the rebel angels do while they wait for him to return? They engage in Homeric style games, they sing songs of their own great deeds, they lose themselves in thought, and they explore hell. This is just extreme Homeric. Uh, the Homeric games would be things like Olympic games, like throwing spears and discus. The Olympic Games, of course, were designed to sharpen the skills of a warrior, running, racing, jumping, throwing spears, discus, all of that type thing. And then when they sit around, when they're not fighting and doing war in the Iliad, they sing songs of their own great deeds, all the great things they've done, and kind of lose themselves in thought and look around. What classical rivers do the explorers discover? List 5 of them. The river Styx, the river Acheron, the river Cocytus, the river Phlegethon, and Lethe. Lethe is the one you dip in after you're dead. You have to dip in there and you lose all your memories. They're all Homeric. What does Lethe do to its drinker? I spoiled this one. It causes the drinker to forget everything. Apologies, we are. I ruined the last one. This week we're reading Paradise Lost, line 601 through approximately book 5, line 500. If you read farther, that's fine, but that far. Come prepared for Milton quizzing again. If you're doing this at home, I ask that you have your book open and go page by page, especially the ladies in Oklahoma. Go page by page, open up these, pause your video, look at each one of these, and find it in your book and quiz against her or against yourself if you need. The Lord bless you. I will next week.